Well, I'm going to start off by showing my age, because it's something I've never done before. It's thanks to a few actors. People like Errol Flynn, Robert Taylor, Basil Rathbone, and the films they made in the 50s, which were then shown on British television in the 60s and 70s. And without their work, I wouldn't be here, because when you see Basil Rathbone fighting it out to the death with Robin Hood, and you think to yourself, God, it's so cool when I want to be a knight in armour. And all these years later, well, I do it at weekends. So thanks to them, really. Now, the weapons I'm going to show you today are not toys, they're all real. These have all been used in battle, in reenactment battle. The only difference between these and the real thing is that they lack a cutting edge. And in itself, they're authentic by having no cutting edge. Because knights in tournament would have used swords without a cutting edge, and if they had no other choice but to use a sword with a cutting edge, they would actually put lead liners on to stop them actually hurting people. I portray knights from around the late 1300s to early 1400s, Henry V, and the weapons that we're using then are very much the most modern thing you could get. The early swords, the broader swords that the Vikings would use, the Saxons would use, very, very blade heavy, wide blades, more a bludgeoning weapon, because they're up against mail. I hate the word chainmail because it's a Victorian word. They're up against mail harness, and therefore what mail harness is very good is against protecting you against a slashing blow, but not very good against a crushing blow, which my partner will tell you about, because she's onto the thump and crush weapons in a minute. But by the time we get to our generation, then we get onto the longsword. The longsword, typical of its period. By now, the sword is becoming more weighted towards the pommel, and it is, yes, certainly a slashing weapon, a hacking weapon, against peasants especially, but what I'm up against now is the knight. The knight in my period is now almost in fully cannoned armour, which means it completely encloses the body. So the sword, now you can see it more better on the hand and a half, and I'll explain the difference in a minute. The hand and a half sword, much more pointed, and so if I can use my partner to show you the areas of attack you would use, especially on a knight. A knight would stand sideways onto you when they're attacking. I'll give you a short sword. And what I'd be then trying to do is actually thrust at the gaps in the armour. The Hollywood thing of clashing blades, yes, we do that in reenactment, but a medieval knight would be very sort of, oh no, I don't really want to clash blades with another knight, because A, it could break my sword, which they did used to break. But also I'd take my cutting edge off. I don't really want to do that. So as the knight would actually raise his arm to attack me, I'd thrust him straight in the armpit. There would be mail there, but it's definitely an unprotected area. And if the person, which I'll talk about later, wouldn't wear mail, then I'm going to thrust straight to the ribcage in between. The swords you'll see here, this one's a diamond edge blade. This one has a fuller. A lot of conjecture about the fullers. Some say, oh, it's a blood channel, because once you thrust into a body, the vacuum in the body, you won't be able to pull it out again. So the blood channel actually lets air into the body. Yes, I can see that, but also I can see the other argument, which I tend to go with, and that is the fuller. It's nothing to do with letting air in the body, it's actually to make the sword lighter. If you're wearing between 5 and 7 stone of armour, the last thing you want is a great big heavy sword. And you see the great big heavy swords that they use in the fantasy films. Yeah, they're great, aren't they? But they'd never work. Nor would actually having a scabbard on your back. And you see these lovely scenes in Xena where they were sort of groped to grab the sword like so, and then the next scene they got it in their hand. That's because if you're actually fighting the opponent, you'd be going, hang on a minute, hang on, I'll be with you. Hang on. Yeah, I've got it out now, so let's go. But again, realities of it, you want as light a sword as possible, and later on, if you want to, you're very welcome to come and pick up the weights of the swords. Somewhere between 2 and 3 pounds would be fine. And these are actually based on these are replicas based on swords that are kept by the Royal Armouries. A chap called Roger Langford makes these wonderful swords. EM45 sprung steel. Lord knows what they would have used back in medieval times. I'm not a swords expert like that. I'm just the person. I'm the driver of the car. I'm not the mechanic. As a knight in armour, this sword works very well for me. You'll see these. This is a long sword. They're both long swords. You can see when we put the hands together, the blades are about the same, but the handles are very different. This is the normal hand grip. This is a hand and a half, or bastard sword. The reason being is because with Helen, who plays Henry Hotspur, a male mitten, it's easy to grab a sword like that. But when you start going onto the plate gauntlets, you can't get a good grip on the sword. So they make the handle a little bit longer, so you can actually, my hand actually rests there when I've got my gauntlet on, which is really nice. And you've got the sword actually does the work for you. And you can sort of, once you start to go with the blade, it'll actually move itself. Very, very lovely weapons. Very finite weapons. And my partner will stand again, I'll show you the attacking areas. In reenactment, we actually go for the angle like so. And there. We're attacking here on the arms, here on the thighs, here on the shins, and the head. Because the heads are well protected, well padded underneath. Great, because we can put on a good show. And if anything goes wrong when we're fighting, and I was just talking to Michael actually, we're a difference between our American reenactors. I'm taught by a chap called Richard Babbage, who is a very, very fine swordsman, and he actually taught me to fight freestyle. He taught me the style of fighting, and then said, now go out and fight. Because if you rehearse a fight, and you rehearse it and rehearse it and rehearse it, there are so many things that can go wrong. But if you're taught to actually fight freestyle, then you're expecting everything and nothing. Yes, we do stunts where we actually choreograph that part of the stunt. If I'm going to be wiped off my feet, then I want to know it's coming. Because I'm a big guy and not as young as I used to be, so if I'm going to crash to the floor, I don't really want to pop a hip or a knee. Now, that's all very well for reenacting, but what did they do in medieval times? Well, the Talhofer script, which is a manuscript written in the late 15th and early 16th centuries, around that time, shows that the areas of attack were very similar. But they're actually attacking the areas I've been taught not to attack. For the simple reason is, the first attack place would be here, which if I miss the neck, lovely area to attack there. If I miss the neck and crash down here, then I'll crush the collarbone. Once the collarbone collapses, the whole arm's gone. 66 pounds per square inch will destroy cartilage. And I'm not talking, oh, I've popped an elbow or I've popped a knee. Destroy it so that the person who owns that piece of cartilage in their knee or elbow will never be able to use it properly again. Even with modern microsurgery, it would still be irreparably damaged. They would have a stiffened arm or a stiffened leg. Modern, or medieval, I'll call it modern, but the medieval longsword of around 1400 will deliver in excess of 200 pounds per square inch of pressure. And so another area of attack would be the elbow and the knee. And of course, wonderful of all, to put the man in a bath chair for the rest of his life, the hip. Excellent area. Of course, the thrusts are good, but the breastplate protects against the thrust. In a tournament situation or a night situation, then hand and a half longsword, wonderful weapon. I love using this weapon, it's beautiful. But in a battlefield situation, the short sword. And this was a lovely weapon used by the ordinary soldier, and it's really, I suppose, not a lot different in length from the gladius that the Romans used to use. And the reason being is when you're stuck in a rank, and you've got people behind you, people beside you, you can't wave a sword around. You can't get the swing because you'll clock the guy behind you or you'll clock the guy beside you. So a nice short sword, it's really nice, the shield, and it's a thrusting weapon, very much like the Romans would use. They're thrusting for gaps in the armour. All very well, you might think, very nice. But the weapon of choice, believe it or not, at Agincourt, by a medieval knight, was not the long sword or the short sword. If you're fighting a medieval knight in full plate armour, what you need is a can opener. This is a poleaxe, wonderful weapon. Thrust the gaps in the armour, obviously this is a reenactment weapon because it was blunted on the end. I should imagine fight marshals would actually do their nut if I had a great big spike on the end. But again, thrusting at gaps in the armour, you're keeping the guy away from you as well. You can come in close, you can slide the blade, and that's another thing we don't allow in reenacting, is actually sliding them, as much as the Gloucesters love to do it. But again, thrusting. The other side, a beautiful tenderising hammer for breaking up armour, which will smash armour joints, wonderfully done. And of course, if you do manage to fail your opponent, then you heft it around the other side and go straight through the breastplate with the axe. Beautiful, beautiful weapon. But believe it or not, very, very heavy at the front. And I've used this on a few occasions at Tewkesbury, and you have to get knackered using it very, very quickly. But very, very nice. But again, there are alternatives for close combat. The bardiche. We brought in a selection of weapons that we thought you'd recognise, especially for role players, because they are wonderful. They talk about the bardiche. I remember when I first saw AD&D and I was thinking about what weapon I could use for my paladin, and I saw bardiche. I thought, well, that sounds good. What's that? Never heard of it. This is a bardiche. Beautiful weapon. Again, a hacking weapon, a smashing weapon. This here is a lovely hook on the end, so if you can get underneath the guy's spurs, you can lift him off his feet. And if he gets a little bit too close, you've got a nice 2-pound counterweight that'll come straight over the top and clock him nicely in the face. It's beautiful. I am totally over the top and enthusiastic about my weapons. They're lovely. But again, one of the things we did differently, which Helen will talk about later, and this is where, as an Englishman, I have to do this. And that's to the people of Wales, because without them, we wouldn't have been the winners on the battlefield that we would have been without the longbow. But the archer would use a short sword, or a very, very shortened version of this, that had a nice shaft and then went out like so, with the handle, called a bollock dagger. What? A bollock dagger, alright. Now some people say it was called a bollock dagger because of the shape of the shaft with the 2 balls on the end. Fair. But I think, and historians argue, and I agree with a chap called Tompkins, who wrote a book about the medieval knight, that it was called the bollock dagger for a very different reason. Now, as a medieval knight from the age of 8, I've been trained to kill you. I am the tank on the medieval battlefield. You would be a peasant, you would be expected to train a longbow on a Sunday, and the law is still in place, so unless you've actually been practicing longbow this morning, you've actually broken the law. But you don't really want to get a medieval knight at sword length. You want to get in close. My partner stands up again. And what, and it's actually documented at Agincourt, they were doing, especially the longbowmen, was as the enemy closed to within a range that was not usable for the longbow, the bodies apparently were piled so high that the English longbowmen were dropping their bows, running up the piles of bodies and then taking French knights off their horses. They would then draw their bollock dagger, stop the guy from attacking him with his longsword by giving him a hug, and then using the bollock dagger to its best effect. They were actually looking for the female archery, which, if anyone knows anything about medical, I think it's the big one that comes from the pump to the toes. And if you sever that one, you'll be dead in under a minute. And apparently, if you sort of strip the guy naked, open his legs and cut his femoral artery, he'll spray blood 30 feet in the air. True. But if you miss the femoral artery, gentlemen out there, I can guarantee you that 6 inches of cold steel stabbed deeply into your testicles will ruin your day. And you definitely won't want to carry on.
Everybody good deals there.
And you sort of withdraw your dagger and take a little spud off the end and so it's yours. So there we have a very brief rundown of the sort of weapons that would be used. Not much more I can say about them without going into great length of detail. And it's only a half an hour. And so I will hand over to my partner and now tell you about the fucking crush fittings.
Slightly classed as the maniac of the society, so he's given me really nasty weapons to talk about. We call these the secondary weapons. They're not as good as the sword. I mean, the sword was the knight's weapon, or arms, but these have big advantages. These were the weapons you'd use to beat the person to death from the outside. If they had armour on, you could beat through that armour with these implements. And if they were peasants and unlucky to have no armour, they wouldn't take one hit from this and they'd be dead. So I'm going to start with my favourite, my weapon of choice, the mace. As you can see, it's well loved, well used. Reenactment weapon again. These basically, the points have been filed down purely for safety reasons. I mean, it doesn't look safe, and it's not really, but the points will probably come to about here. They'd be razor sharp. One punch from one of these. If you could get under the sword and get close enough to the knight to hit him, or you could hit him from horseback, one punch and you would punch through the armour. Now, some people might think, oh, that's not going to happen. I'll give you an example. I use this against Cliff in the shows. Quite a hefty chap, as you can see. And normally one whack from this and you can deflect with the shield. One show, they put me up against a smaller chap. The first hit from this punched right through his wooden shield, which is about that thick, and nearly took him off his feet. Just one hit from this. And this is a safe reenactment weapon. We move on to another secondary weapon. The axe. A knight's axe. People think that's not an axe, that's rubbish. Not going to do anything with that. You're thinking of the axes with the big heads, the big double heads they were around, take people off their feet. This is a beautiful weapon. It's light, you have reach, and you have a very, very thin blade, a very small head, which means the pounds per square inch, it takes less to get through a helm. If you hit somebody with a great helm, which is the big barrel ones with the letterbox in the front, if you hit them flat on the head, that thin blade would punch right through. And it would take that guy down and probably smash his skull and go into his brain. Not nice. The mace on chain. A lot of people call it the Morning Star. Pictures I've seen of Morning Stars tend to have a longer shaft, so we prefer to call this the mace on chain. Lovely weapon. More of a mounted weapon. As you go by on your horse, you're swinging it, and if anyone gets close, they lose their face. What they'd also do is let the spikes go rusty, because they didn't understand about medicine or illness in medieval days, not as much as we do now. They didn't understand what tetanus was. They knew that if they let them go rusty, if you took someone's face off with this, and it would leave it diseased. So they wouldn't die straight away. Well, they might die straight away if you hit them properly. But if you left them on a bloody mess in the floor, then they'd die probably quite horribly from gangrene a few weeks later. Not nasty enough to sort of wish that on someone. I'd rather kill them outright, but if they let me loose with a real sword. But it was just as effective, because then those knights or those peasants wouldn't be able to fight ever again, because they died from disease. Horseman's flail, or the German scorpion. Yet again, lovely weapon, horseback weapon.
I hope they're attacked well.
Yeah, we use these in shows, or Cliff uses this in the show. This is a reenactment weapon again, been made safe. Obviously they wouldn't let the real one out, because each little chain have a barbed hook on the end. As you can imagine, on your horse, going along comes some poor peasant with nothing on his face, hooks catch into his face and rip the front of his face off. What they'd also do, yes again, they wouldn't understand about the medical side of it, but they think, if we let this get dirty, and then we rub that dirt into the wound, that person's going to die horribly. So they used to go along and say, ooh, pile of horse poo, that's lovely. Dip the hooks in, and as they ripped your face off, they wiped the horse poo into the wound. Not nice. This was actually adapted from a peasant's threshing weapon, well, an implement. Probably some knight went along one day, and they're like, oh, I like that. Could make the handle shorter and put hooks on the end of it, that would be a great weapon. And I can imagine that's how a lot of the weapons are made. They're seeing things that are used in the fields, and they thought, can do some injuries with that, that's lovely. But if you ask me about the greatest weapon ever made on a medieval battlefield, then I'd have to say, thanks to the Welsh again, it's the longbow. The thing with the longbow is, it can be used at long range. You could stand at the end of a football field and you could hit a dinner plate that someone's holding up. In a medieval army, it didn't matter if you were that good a shot, because if there were 5,000 people charging at you, if you loose off your arrows, you're going to hit something. A good archer could actually loose off around 10 arrows a minute. At any time, there would be 3 on their way. One leading the bow, one in the air, one landing. At Agincourt, there were 5,000 English archers. So you can imagine that the French rode into a pattering hail of 15,000 arrows a minute. From a distance, I'd say maybe half of a pitch, you could basically loose off an arrow and be a knight in armour. You'd have your lovely armour-piercing bodkins, the heads that they put on the arrows. That basically have a thin, like a bullet on the front, with a shoulder. Hit the armour, the shoulder would open up the hole so the shaft could go through. Go through the armour, through the mail underneath, through your padded jacket, into your muscles, your bones, smash your bones, spin you around like a rag doll, throw you on the floor, but in the meantime, it's going out your back, out through the padding, the mail, and the armour, and sticking out that far. So you can imagine that, you know, the medieval knights were the medieval tank, that was the medieval bazooka. There were different sorts of bodkins that could put on the arrows. There was the armour-piercing one I've spoken about. There was the mail-piercing bodkin, about that long, to a needle point. Same with the shoulder again. Hit the mail, go through the link, open up the link, right through into the body. There was something called a deviser swallowtail, which was actually made like a swallowtail, and that used to spin in the air as it went. So obviously it hit someone who was unprotected, like a peasant, in just a tunic, that would hit him like a blender. That would drill into him as it hit him, and then take him off his feet if he survived. And then, of course, there was the horse arrow. There's a few of you out there probably thinking, oh, fancy doing that to horses. We're not talking dobbing here, we're not talking Champion the Wonder Horse. These are evil, evil animals. I mean, they were to be classed as a weapon on the battlefield. They were picked for their nastiness. Their sheer size was very imposing. They were taught to kick, to bite, and to work independently of the knight. And if you've got a tank coming at you on top of one of these things, and you want to get that knight off, then why not attack the horse? So they'd use their like crescent shapes, wing shapes, and they'd stick into the horse like that, and they would waggle. It wouldn't kill the horse, it'd just drive that horse berserk. So he would then kick out the other horses, fight the other horses, fight the other knights around him. You can imagine that there's hundreds of these horses in a rank, and that's going to cause chaos in the medieval army. So despite all of these lovely, gruesome, nasty, face-ripping, chunk-searing weapons, for me, bow would be the greatest weapon of all time. Medieval times.
The other thing I would add about the longbow, which I saw quite recently, was actually the methods of getting arrows out of bodkins out.
Oh, I forgot that.
Yeah.
That's nasty.
Yeah, the French actually were frightened of us. Everybody knows that's where we get this from. Because English longbowmen were actually taught the French by standing there going like this, which is to show them that they still got their arrow fingers, so that they could actually draw the drawstrings. If they were captured by the French, the first thing they do is drag them off the longbow and hack their 2 fingers off, so that they could never fight again. But what the English were absolutely horrible about, as far as I know, we're the only nation that did it, was when they actually made their shafts, they used to attach the bodkins. The French used to use horse glue to glue the bodkins on. We used to use candle wax, just attached to the candle wax. So if you were at long range and you get hit by an arrow, it wouldn't stick through, it would go deep into the body. You're then rushed off to the barber surgeon, who has just finished sort of lancing of oil on a horse, and sort of wipes it in his apron and is ready for you now. He pulls the shaft out, and of course the head's only attached by candle wax. The shaft comes out easily, leaving the bodkin head still inside the person. And a documentary I saw quite recently, which was talking about the Battle of Shrewsbury. Now Henry V, if you ever see paintings of Henry V, you only ever see him in profile. And that's because as a young prince at the Battle of Shrewsbury, he actually got hit in the face with an arrow. And what was quite nice about it, from a historian's point of view, is that the king's surgeon operated on him, and the king's surgeon had to write a report back to the king to tell him how his son was. And he said that the arrow would actually come down at an angle and hit him in the face like so. And it was the nose bristle that actually stopped the bodkin in the end, and it was actually embedded in his face like that. And the Welsh, who's taught us how to put shafts on with candle wax, they withdrew the shaft, leaving the head still embedded in his face. And they showed us this wonderful implement for removing bodkin heads, which was like a snub nose thing, almost like a modern bottle opener. And as they screwed it into the wound, this would open like so. And then they would release some sort of catch device, and it would then close on the bodkin head. And from what they said, it took 3 attempts to get it out. And you can imagine this young 14-year-old boy, who's his first real battle, being held down while they were putting this implement inside to grab it and pull it out again. And that's why when you see Henry V, he's always in profile, because he's got a huge scar on his face. How long we got now? Any questions?
Have you ever been hurt? Oh God.
Yes. Yes. One of the things I always say to people who get into reenactment, that if you don't want to get hurt, take up stamp collecting. Because we try and make it as safe as possible, but it's a contact sport.
And broken fingers tend to be...
Show her your scar, go on.
I was at a battle called Warwick, which has actually been banned now. It was called the Battle on the Flags, and it was as real as they could possibly make it without actually trying to join each other.
Well,
And I have a scar on my arm where a Beaumont's pike punctured my arm. So you can see the exit room there and the entrance room there. And it actually punctured right through.
Go on, about the waving stick and all that.
Yeah, I saw something was explained to me the other day, which I didn't understand. I don't know if any of you were watching the programme on human instinct. That's been on the television, a documentary about human instinct. And they're actually talking about how when you're in a battle, and when the body is actually in combat, how endorphins and adrenaline actually protects the person who's fighting. And endorphins and adrenaline are actually pain blockers. And I was actually fighting the guy opposite, and he come in with the thrust, and it actually slipped off my, we used what we call a buckler, which is a little shield, and it slipped off the top of the buckler and stabbed me straight in the gap, and I thought, God, that's going to hurt in the morning. And that's all I thought, and I carried on fighting. I was using 15th century armour, which has something called a bivouar, or a dribble plate, which is a small piece that comes up like so, and covers the jawbone. And the problem with them is they are like that. You literally, you can't look down, because even when you bend down, you can't see much. And I carried on fighting, and the marshals there have a white stick with a red painted end. And if you're doing anything wrong or there's any danger, they actually wave it in front of your face and you withdraw. And I'm fighting away, and all of a sudden this little white stick starts waving in front of my face like this, and I sort of step back and I turn around to the marshal and I said, well, what's the problem? And he said, are you going to get medical attention? So I said, what for? And he said, your arm. And I lifted my arm up, and it was literally red from there right the way down. And I literally hadn't noticed I'd been that badly injured. And human instinct the other week actually explained why I didn't know. And to say later on in the evening, when I was lifting a pint, then I was like, because it was really hurting. But it wasn't until, and even then I thought, well, it's only, sometimes you catch a nick, and they will bleed like anything. And it's not really serious, but when the medic opened up my shirt and said, well, that's quite deep, I think we'll step out the rest of the time. I'm like, no, I'm having fun.
There was mine. My worst injury, I think.
Helen's worst injury,
Right,
which,
sir?
yeah, which I just explain what happened.
Oh God, no, this is too close to comfort.
Basically, 2 nights we were fighting the pole arms behind Helen. It was an incredibly hot day on a battlefield that sloped quite badly, but was hardened in the forest. And the rules are, in Re-enactment, that if you are going to go in for a grapple, you actually drop a pole arm. But they didn't. They basically started hugging each other, and the pole arm was caught up like this, and they're fighting, and they hit the slope, they hit a bump, and all of a sudden they started to fall.
Of course, there's me sort of fighting someone in front of me, thinking, oh, you know, there's someone behind me, I'm going to get hit from behind. Turned around to see what was going on, saw this coming towards my face. Caught me there, which I still have a scar.
The sort of pole arm sort of this angle.
Basically shattered my lower part of my eye and cut my lower eyelid open. And basically I still have almost like not a, well, it's a dent. It goes all the way down there. And I had to sew my eyelid back up. And obviously that was all broken inside, so it's pretty horrible.
Of course, being the loving husband that I am, I was very concerned that my wife had been injured. And I didn't know at that time that the lower orbit of the eye had been smashed or anything like that. And someone said, Helen's been injured, so I rushed off to the medical tent, trying to be all consoling. And as I walked into the medical tent, the medical guys are looking at it, and you could see literally underneath the eyeball where it had all been smashed away. And she looked up at me and she said, "Is it bad?" And I went,
Okay, I have a question.
Go on then, Michael.
Why?
why?
Yes.
Because we're mad.
Ah.
No, I think,
No, it's like this
I don't know.
love of history.
Love of
the
history
major thing
primarily.
that does it.
Plus also, war, I mean, I was in the Royal Navy, so I mean, war is very clinical today. You look at a dot on a radar screen, you push a button, that dot disappears, and 350 people just went up in smoke. My respect for medieval combatants is immense, because to actually feel the breath of the person you're killing on your face is amazing. We stood at Tewkesbury the very first time. Tewkesbury's the biggest thing we do. It's about 2,000 soldiers on the field. And we stood there, it was sort of getting a bit nervous, we're all standing around, you can feel the adrenaline, because everybody starts stamping their feet, so it shows that everyone's a bit tense. And all the flags are out and all the rest of it, and the drummers stand behind you and they just go boom, 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 like this. And you're thinking, oh, shut up. I'm nervous enough as it is. And then Eddie, who plays the Duke of Somerset, sort of come out and he said, Duke of Somerset's battle group will advance. And he drew his sword, he goes, advance, like so. And then all the drummers go, boom, 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 and all the flags come with you. And your heart literally goes, boom, like that. And the first time I did it, I'm seeing the Gloucesters coming towards me. And the Gloucesters have a wonderful thing called the meat grinder. They're a pole block group, 2 ranks deep. The front row are like so, back row are like so. And as they walk forward, they actually alternate it, like so. So all you see, as you're coming towards them, and they're shouting, come on then, as they're taking a step, you see this like meat grinding effect coming towards you. And as you're advancing towards it, you're thinking, why do I know this is just a game?
I think it's like any other dangerous sport. Because you have to admit it's a dangerous sport, because there's an element that you could actually die doing this. It's not something that, a lot of people think, yeah, I can go out there with a sword and I can be cool, I can be Braveheart. But these are real weapons. Yeah, they're not sharp. You hit someone wrong with one of these, and you can put them in a wheelchair or you could kill them. But it's that whole adrenaline rush. When you go out there, you get yourself all worked up, and that first clash, and you're playing your character, it's like acting. Once you put costume on, it's that last piece, or the first piece that goes on, and you're then that character, because we play historical characters.
Yeah, I was saying to Cliff earlier that I've been to quite a few conventions, for example, in Germany, where the whole thing is choreographed. And that looks false. So, be very careful. Each of you pick up a sword or a weapon and show us. an improvised fight?
Can't do it.
You can't do it. Why is that?
Because we're not wearing hand and head protection.
Oh, right,
Rules of our
okay.
society.
Yeah, yeah.
You also need to be in behind
Enclosed area, yeah.
Ah, right.
It's all about insurance, unfortunately.
No, that's
Much
fair.
Two funny things I'll tell you, two funny anecdotes which always stick in my mind, was our American cousins do reenactment. They wear full plate armour, fully usable, workable armour, the same as what we wear, and they won't use wooden swords. Because if you even bruise one of them slightly, you'll get a lawsuit slapped on you so that you would believe it. And it's a gentleman's agreement. When I go out on the battlefield, I know that yes, it's a very small chance, but there is still a chance that I can spend the rest of my life like Christopher Reeve. But I would not even think about suing the person responsible, unless he did something absolutely stupid. But even then, I would think twice. Well, it's a gentleman's agreement. I would do my best not to harm someone, and they would do their best not to harm me. The other funny anecdote, which I think I'll remember to my grave, is an American tourist at Warwick Castle who actually said to a reenactor in my hearing, "Gee, how do you make the castles look so old?" And he actually turned around with a straight face and said, "It's a special paint we use." And she went, "Oh yeah, it's fine." Walked away quite happy with that answer. Anything else?
Yeah, I'm surprised the EC or the government haven't tried properly before. Maybe use rubber weapons or something.
We are.
Yeah,
No, the Medieval Society is part of the Early Medieval Alliance, who in turn are governed by the National Association of Reenactment Societies, NARES, who in turn have people on their committee from the Health and Safety Executive. They are the ones who say we must wear hard hats, we must wear gloves, which is sensible. And again, as the lady quite rightly pointed out, we must have a barrier between us. And again, if we are doing a combat display, we must have a minimum £2 million public liability insurance, which I have to then, get on a hobby horse. Insurance companies used to charge us about £185 a year to be insured for £2 million public liability. They then saw how reenactment was growing, and in the 10 years that I ran Excalibur and also Plymouth Medieval Society, we never ever claimed for public liability. Never. And this year, they put our insurance up to just under £1,000. And what we're doing now is a lot of the smaller societies are actually banding together under things like the Early Medieval Alliance and then insuring the alliance.
When you go to America, you do go to America.
No,
No, we don't.
You don't?
No.
Oh.
no, we've been to France.
You've not, all right, well,
Yeah.
let's say France. How do you get those weapons on the aircraft?
We actually contacted Her Majesty's Customs the first time we went to France and said, look, is there any rules, regulations you have to follow? And they went, what, you're taking swords to France to kill French people? Fine.
There was this funny story about this Princess Loudon was with us, and he called Adrian, and he got stopped by customs, and they said, oh, open your boot and everything. And this boot's full of armour, axes, daggers, swords, I mean the whole lot. And sort of like,
This was on the French side, by the way, coming back.
it opens up, and this guy looks into it, and he like beckons this other guy because they carry guns. The other guy came over and unclipped his gun. And there's our friend going, my God, they're going to shoot me. I mean, he showed him that he was part of a reenactment society. He went, oh, in that case, yeah, that's fine. You know?
That's fine. Where they do get a bit funny, obviously, is firearms, muskets and cannons, things like that. They get very, very funny numbers at that. But they seem to have no problems with weapons. We went to Agincourt, and considering we killed 15,000 French men in the first hour of the Battle of Agincourt, they were very friendly to us.
Actually, there was only one Frenchman on the field.
Yeah, they're mostly Belgians and Dutch, actually.
One Frenchman.
They haven't got the idea of acting the part. Frank is a wonderful Geordie guy. He actually comes in, and if he knows he's going to hit your shield, he'll really give it some welly when he hits your shield. And he'd come up to this it was a Belgian guy, wasn't it? And he whacked his shield, something real welly hit. And this Frenchman sort of fell over straight away, and he's thinking, oh, Oh no, he says, you're not dead yet, get up. And this guy was literally like a chad under his shirt. No.
We got time for one last question and then it's Barry's turn. I've been...
Barry? What's he going to talk about?
Oh,
Guns.
spooky.
How, between the two of you, how big's the collection you've got?
Oh, going. Helen's got a push on
What do
for
your
helmets.
neighbours think?
They think we're nuts.
That's all right.
I have about, yeah, every time I see a new helmet, oh, I love that one. I have about 4 helmets of different sorts. Actually, I've got about 5 now, haven't I? 3 swords. One. Only 3 at the moment. 3, yeah. These were mine. That one we don't use because we've actually tried to use that in the show and it's more dangerous to the person because it actually bounces off the shield and comes back at you. So we decided only to use that for educational purposes. We use this one. What else have we got? Generally about it.
Yeah, we have a great collection. We tend to not carry redundant weapons. There's this first sword I passed my knighthood test with, which has gone past its sell-by date now. And I kept that for memory's sake because they start to grain up after a while.
5 swords.
They tend to grain up and bits start to chip out and they start to become dangerous then. So not dangerous in the respect that they could hurt someone that we're fighting, but probably a member of the audience. Because if you hit something and the last 6 inches suddenly starts to spin off into the audience, that'd be great, wouldn't it? So, but I remember once an American Civil War reenactor was taking a mickey out of a certain rock and sort of said, "Well, I've got a gun, come on then." And I said, "Yeah, mate, your gun's firing blanks. This is loaded all the time." Even if it's a reenactment,
Yeah.
still.
Well, thank you for the invite, but I don't think I'll come to your house for tea.
I mean, it used to be in the beginning, we used to go to shows with our kit in a bag, a plastic bag. And now we fill our car and we need a trailer now as well. It's getting really silly.
We're getting more into the living history side of it as well now. So we've just purchased a 14-foot by diameter, 15-foot tall pavilion tent.
We now have 2 tents.
Which is absolutely beautiful. So I'm like a kid when I was opening it. Like, look at this! And it took 3 of us to put it up. And we went down to her mum's garden and couldn't get it up in her back garden, so we had to actually use the background of a scout hut. So, but there we are. Thank you very much.
Thank you.